Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. I hope you had a long weekend that was fun and worthwhile, and even worth not having a Monday Rules for Retrograde show. We're going to fit in 3 shows this week, probably today, tomorrow, and Friday, or some combination thereof. Labor Day. What even is it? It's a day we all take off and we have a good time. I hope your families are safe, parish orphans, retrogrades. I hope your families are holy and able to get to the Latin Mass, which is becoming more and more and more of a challenge. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the tensions over clericalism, which swirl amid the Knights of Malta overhaul undertaken by Francis, which began in 2016. Last week, we had a kind of conclusion to all of the swirling turmoil with the Knights of Malta that began, in most of our view, about 6 years ago, when Cardinal Burke was removed as the patron of the Knights of Malta over a strange and all too typical contraception distribution scandal involving the Knights of Malta. There was a layman named Boslager who was overseeing the distribution of condoms under the Knights of Malta. Cardinal Burke, as the patron of the order, sovereign patron of the order, removed him, and lots of holy men who support Cardinal Burke helped the transaction to take place. And Francis basically shut it down 6 years ago. He ended up removing Cardinal Burke, the good guy, as the, and I might have some this is all out of semi recent memory, midterm memory. Cardinal Burke was removed as the patron, and Boslager was reinstated by Francis. And for the last 6 years, there have been little adjustments to the Sovereign Order of Malta. And last week, something happened which seems to give us the direction, the cardinal direction in which Pope Francis is traveling. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to review the history. I was doing a bad job right now by way of introduction. And I'm going to get more into the details of what's happened over the last couple of years and tell you what Francis has recently done, which is decreed a new constitution for the Knights of Malta and dissolved its government ahead of the selection of a brand new leadership team. And I'm also going to tell you what I think this means, because it couples with a few other moves made by Francis in the Vatican last week that this Gumby on Twitter said, it's Gumby for Christ, said in the past few weeks, following rumors that he may be stepping down. It might not necessarily be following upon those rumors, but chronologically, yes, it's following on those rumors. Pope Francis has dissolved the Knights of Malta leadership, downgraded the status of Opus Dei, we're also going to talk about that briefly, and ordered Vatican entities to move all funds into the Vatican Bank. Is Francis trying to avert a coup? So on today's episode, we're going to answer this question. Is he trying to avert a coup? I don't usually do question mark shows, interrogative show titles, where the answer is no. Usually if I do a question mark, the answer is yes. I'm not sure precisely what coup Francis would be trying to avert here. There seems to be a coup led by Francis himself to the Knights of Malta that's taken low these 6 years. I'm not sure necessarily that his actions, we'll assess it point by point in today's show. I'm not sure his actions amount to one constellation of motives and that we'd group together in one kind of intentional act or set of acts that are pursuant to him making plans to retire. So I think the answer is no. I don't think he's trying to avert a coup. We'll try to figure out what Gumby meant in this tweet. It's worth looking into. It's not a waste of time. You've heard me mock YouTube show titles that are obviously no, this is not it. I think I understand what he means. I'll explain it. But I think ultimately the answer is no. It's still worth our time. First, though, I would like to ask you to like this video, subscribe, click the notification bell. We're trying to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, 40,000 subscribers. I'd prayerfully ask that you subscribe to this channel if you regularly watch. Like the video, leave a comment. I like cookies is good enough. That really helps us. What else helps the channel, Rules for Retrogrades, is if you can support us for $5 a month, $10 a month, or more at all levels on Patreon. Go to timothyjgordon.patreon. It helps us a great deal, and you get something in return depending on the level of Patreon you select. One desideratum that all patrons will get alike in return for their patronage of this channel and me and my books and all of the apostolate in general is you can join our periodic book clubs or watching clubs. Now, become a Patreon today of Timothy J. Gordon, and what you can do is be prepared for next month's watching club. In October, we are going to watch a show whose first season, though its source is ultimately Netflix, its first season is quite Aristotelian. We're going to watch this show, Stranger Things. I'm going to explain, I've written on it for Catholic World Report. I'm going to explain why it's so Aristotelian and why it's so shocking that the first season, at least, of Stranger Things is so beautifully Catholic, why there's so much natural virtue in the first season. And it's beautiful for October. That's why we're doing it in the month of October before the Hallowtide of Halloween, November 1st and November 2nd. It's fun to have fun, and that's the way to do it. Also, I've pointed your attention to this, the Saint Maker. Here it is, the Saint Maker, which is a really cool daily and weekly calendar that you can use and know you can be tied into the liturgical calendar, daily devotionals. You get really intentional if you use this thing properly about your motivations and first steps. It's beautiful. That's why it's called the Saint Maker. And I would offer you guys a discount today. Rules for Retrogrades listeners have ready access to. You can learn more about it and get 10% off by visiting thesaintmaker.com/retrogrades and use the promo code retrogrades at checkout. No matter what your Catholic vocation, the Saint Maker is a one-of-a-kind personal journal and planner to help you reignite your faith, succeed in life, experience true spiritual freedom. It's centered on Catholic wisdom and backed by modern productivity science, which is a good 1-2 punch. There's never been a resource like the Saint Maker to keep you focused, productive, and on fire for the faith every day. That is the Saint Maker, and retrogrades and parish orphans out there can get a 10% discount on their first Saint Maker. Visit thesaintmaker.com/retrogrades. Use promo code retrogrades today. Final plug I have to give is the Baltimore Catechism class, which is free, absolutely free if you go to timothyjgordon.com. It begins tonight. It's going to be, it's all full. So we're full up. 500 seats. We actually went over 500 a little bit. Some people, I think, registered separately between husband and wife and maybe the kid. They took up 3 seats, so we should be able to get 520 registrations down to 500 because that happened a few times. We can't take any more registrations. Check back next week. The first free class is tonight. There's a suggested donation, not necessarily related to the class, of $100 that you can make on DonorBox, but the class is absolutely free, and the first class is tonight at 7 Central Standard Time. So if you already registered for it, don't forget, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We are going through a first of 8 courses on the Baltimore Catechism tonight. Okay, I'm pumped. Let us look into this story about the Pope. Pope Francis dissolving the Knights of Malta in its very leadership and issuing a brand new constitution. What in the world is going on with the Knights of Malta? First off, what is the Knights of Malta? Probably a lot of you out there have asked that ever since 2016, when Pope Francis started causing static with it, the way he likes to do in all areas of the Catholic life. He's caused static with the Knights of Malta, and it's a strange-sounding proposition. It comes from the Crusades, from the 11th century, the Sovereign Order of Malta. Knights of Malta are the ones in subservice of it, and they employ some 45,000 staff, assisted by almost 100,000 volunteers. They're engaged in a variety of humanitarian projects around the world with a budget of roughly $2.3 billion. So this thing is bankrolled. Critics warn, according to this Crux Now article, that changes may jeopardize the sovereign standing of the Knights of Malta and sideline lay members of the group who work arm in arm with the clerics in the group. The lay members actually have the expertise to effectually oversee the works. Here's a bit of history for you. Recent and ancient. Tensions within the Knights burst into public view in 2016 when a group around American Cardinal Raymond Burke, at the time the spiritual patron of the Knights, demanded the resignation of the group's chief executive, German layman Albrecht von Boeselager, in the wake of controversy regarding the distribution of condoms by a Knights-sponsored charity in Myanmar. Pope Francis ordered von Boeselager reinstated, undoing what his chieftain, Burke, had rightly done. And he installed a provisional leadership team for the Knights and set... I'm sorry. He instated a Boeselager himself, and he began a review process of the group's internal structures, which eventually led to this Saturday, 3 days ago, the complete constitutional overhaul. In addition to adding the new constitution and replacing the old, Pope Francis also installed a provisional leadership team for the Knights. Can't talk today. I apologize. And set January the 25th as a date for the general chapter meeting to elect a new Grand Master. Among other changes, according to cruxnow.com, the new constitution eliminates the requirement that the Grand Master and other top knights must have noble lineage, which critics argued effectively, apparently, limited leadership roles to European aristocrats. It also does away with the tradition of Grand Masters being elected for life, limiting them to a 10-year term that can only be renewed once and requiring them to step down at 85. I mean, if you really want to be efficient as an efficiency provision, probably make them step down at 65. I mean, if you're cracking down, why let a, octogenarian do this at all? Okay, so they're doing so, of course, because Pope Francis and his lieutenants like Italian Cardinal Silvano Tomasi want to be more democratic. That's their motivation for doing all this. Yet in the run-up to Saturday's decree, the proposals drew protests from several influential members of the order, including German businessman Ernst von Freiberg, former head of the Institute for the Works of Religion, better known as the Vatican Bank, which is also part of our news today, that Gumby on Twitter thought constituted one mass attempt to avert a coup. Okay, let's get a little more history, shall we? It was founded in the 11th century during the Crusades. It's called the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. What the heck is that? It's long been a sort of hybrid entity within the Catholic Church. It has 48 national associations and 13,500 members. Okay. Stressed in a briefing for reporters by Italian Cardinal Gianfranco Ghirlanda, an expert on canon law who was part of the drafting team for the new constitution, said the group had to remain under the purview of the Vatican. It will now be more like a clergy-run outfit rather than a hybrid clergy and secular outfit. And this change, overhaul of the Constitution, will make it a direct creature under the purview of the Vatican. Whereas before it had international sovereignty. We're not 100% sure how that will be affected. It'll be less sovereign now and more operated as a creature of the Vatican. So, let's see. Officially, the Knights' new management has welcomed the changes, calling them a clear blueprint for a more efficient, streamlined governance. In a statement released Sunday by Father John Dunlop, head of provisional government. Yet in the run-up to Saturday's decree, the proposals drew protests from several influential members of the order. I cited one earlier. So it's strange. It's very strange even. They have this tie to the Vatican Bank. The Knights of Malta do. They're an international outfit run by a combo of a patron and clerics and secular experts. And for the last 6 years, it's been covered rather tightly by conservative Catholic media. Oh, another change to the Knights of Malta. Well, I didn't know what the Knights of Malta were before Cardinal Burke was removed. Maybe you guys did. I didn't. It's more important than even the trad sites and the conservative websites were admitting at the time. And it's clear now that it has something to do with the Vatican Bank. The sovereignty in this move is significantly reduced by this constitutional change and transferred to the Holy See. You have a lot of overlapping personnel that have something to do with the Vatican Bank. This critic of the change, von Freiberg, charges that, among other things, the emphasis on control by a small clerical cadre within the Knights runs contrary to Pope Francis's own repeated warnings about the dangers of clericalism. Now, how many times have we said this, parish orphans and retrogrades, that Pope Francis, who reduced the Summer of Shame and the pedo-sex crisis in the church in late 2018, the titular head was Uncle Ted McCarrick. You know all about him. Pope Francis reduced all this trouble merely to clericalism. Remember, I think back in the day we were making jokes when, and we shouldn't even make jokes about it. It's horrible. It's sexual abuse. But we were saying, oh, that guy got clericalized. Maybe it's too soon. But we weren't making the joke about the severity of the crime of sex abuse. No, that's utterly severe. And we were saying the punishment must be more severe. We were making the jokes about the flippant treatment of it by Francis and his chiefs at the top of the Vatican, who were not punishing many of the folks that needed to be punished after the Summer of Shame. Remember that? And Francis said that the sex abuse crisis reduces to clericalism. What he was imputing to the victims is that they revered priests too much, such that, I guess what he meant, it was never quite spelled out. They revered priests so much with such a posture of filial piety that if a priest started molesting them, they would feel uncomfortable doing so because of the authoritarian structure imposed by the clericalism of the church. I guess that's what he meant. No one ever knew. We made jokes because it was such a bad take. But the point is, since then, in 2018, same year, just a couple years after the original Knights of Malta shake-up, Pope Francis has been after clericalism. And now, like last summer, with Traditionis Custodes, an act of clericalism, top-down, highest priest sacerdotal worship, the highest priest in the church, highest bishop in the church is Francis. When he was telling locals who loved the TLM that they can no longer celebrate it, even local bishops that they can no longer celebrate it, we said that's clericalism. I thought you hated clericalism. I thought you liked subsidiarity. The German bishops reportedly desecrate the Eucharist by giving it to intercommunion with Lutherans. And Francis refuses to crack down on that because, hey, he doesn't like clericalism. He doesn't want to issue top-down orders that, according to him, encourage the worship of bishops, the worship of a pyramidal hierarchy. Well, why wouldn't he allow people that like the Latin Mass to keep going to Latin Mass? Okay, so we've been saying that since July of last year, and you guys know it. And there are other things besides which Francis has done that render hypocritical his critiques of clericalism, because he's quite the autocrat. I haven't been to Rome since Benedict's pontificate, frankly, but the widely reported milieu in the Vatican is one of fear. There were questions of wiretapping and surveillance. Some people, they might be exaggerating, have said under Pope Francis, the Vatican has turned into a surveillance state. That sounds clericalist. And now in today's story too, von Freiberg is imputing more clericalism to none other than Francis. The sovereignty of the knights is significantly reduced by this and transferred to the Holy See. Among other things, the emphasis on control by a small clerical cadre runs contrary to Francis's own repeated warnings about the dangers of clericalism. He follows an email with a public letter to the Pope signed by the heads of 13 national associations of the Knights of Malta. So they're not just in Malta, little Malta. They collectively represent almost 95% of its charitable activity. The group included the head of the German branch, which by itself employs 33,000 of the group's 45,000 staff. So big presence in Germany. The group wrote this: if the Order of Malta is reformed in the proposed way, the order would suffer massive damage and its many works might get into difficulties. Cardinal Tomasi's current draft recommends removing responsibility from lay members and instead giving organizational control to 36 professed knights. While they're important to the order, it is not feasible that the work of over 13,000 heavily engaged people can be fulfilled by less than 40. Okay, this is kind of technical. The reason that it jumps out today is because whether or not it pursues is pursuant to speculation all summer long. It's really been all year long from last summer to this, which is now over. Summer 2022 is almost done. We're in the last 3 weeks. That Francis might retire. He might step down. He acknowledged it at the beginning of last month. He's in bad shape. He needs a wheelchair. So if he was going to step down, being the ideologue we know he is, he would be making rapid changes. I'm not saying he will step down. A major cardinal close to him that was anonymous at the beginning of 2022 said it's definitely happening. I expressed some interest in this, some reservation. Lots of you expressed reservation because leftists, when that's what Francis is, he's the man of the left, typically do not step down. They do not cede power. They do not give up positions of influence that enable them to transact radical change, which is what they're all about. Well, we can't say. No man knows the hour, no man knows the future, and whether or not Francis is planning to step down is clear in at most only one mind, his. Maybe some group of Sankt Gallen confidants or something. But the point is, I can't tell you whether he will or he won't, but I don't think it's a claptrap story. I don't think it's pure bunk. I think he might. And what you'd look for if he might is a constellation of moving pieces. So the Order of Malta has proven very dear to him, dear enough to trouble about in several different phases over the last 6 years. I read you that story. There's a lot of overlapping personnel, or at least significant overlapping personnel, between some of these knights and the Vatican Bank. Well, here's this other story from the week before last, kind of slipped between the cracks. This was published by Catholic News Agency on August the 23rd, written by Hannah Brockhouse. Pope Francis has ordered that the Holy See and connected entities move all financial assets to the Institute for Works of Religion, IOR, commonly known as the Vatican Bank. It's technically not a bank. It's a financial institution. We'll talk about why in a second. The point is, this is interesting. The Pope's rescript, issued August 23, clarifies the interpretation of a paragraph in the new constitution of the Roman Curia, Praedicate Evangelium, promulgated back in March, and people didn't really catch this dimension of the new constitution back in March. According to Francis's rescript, financial and liquid assets held in banks other than the IOR must be moved to the Vatican Bank within 30 days of September the 1st, 2022, so 5 days ago. They've got to the end of September. The IOR, based in Vatican City-State, has 110 employees, 14,519 clients. As of 2021, it looked after 5.2 billion euros of client assets. That is a disproportionately high amount of cash flow for such a small financial institution. Though it's commonly called a bank, it's a financial institution because it's got no branches. It works within the Vatican City-State to provide services to clients. The IOR saw its numbers of clients decline by 472 from almost 15,000 at the end of 2020 to about 14,519 in 2021. And nearly half of its clients in 2019 were religious orders. Okay. So in the August the 23rd rescript, Pope Francis said, Article 219, paragraph 3 of Praedicate Evangelium, quote, must be interpreted to mean that the activity of asset manager and custodian of the movable patrimony of the Holy See and of the institutions connected with the Holy See is the exclusive responsibility of the Institute for the Works of Religion. Okay, this is curious. And I'm not a Vatican financial expert. There aren't many of those around. But this does mean something. Transferring money around is always transactional. Now, it can be transactional to some sort of financial overhaul, but even any financial overhaul is incentivized by some work within the, some motive in the life of the transferor. Now, this could be something like what Gumby suspects, that Pope Francis, if you put all of these things together into one constellation, Pope Francis is transferring money around. He's making this disproportionately influential Order of Malta fundamentally different than it was before, when it was basically run by Cardinal Burke. And there's some connection between the two. I've never been able to learn what the connection between the staffs of the Order of Malta and the Vatican Bank are. But they're both transferring around. And he's moving all funds by the end of this month, according to the order. Now, the third, I'm not sure this is related, but the third fact in this bundle pointed at by Gumby on Twitter is this new apostolic letter. It's a motu proprio called Ad Charisma Tuendum by Francis, and it also came out recently. And what they're doing is rearranging the way that Opus Dei works. And whenever you guys understand how this works, anytime Opus Dei makes any move, for whatever hilarious reason, secularists and even our goodly Protestant brethren, they always think Opus Dei is, I think, more important than it is. Now, it is financially very influential because of the way that the order is structured. But it's interesting that now the personal prelature of Opus Dei, which is always what folks wanted for SSPX, personal prelature, so that the structure is not under the governance of the local bishop, but it's under its own prelature. It's treated like a corporate person. This is an article from Where Peter Is, so you're going to get a leftist spin. But I think it's got some important points. After Pope Francis issued the motu proprio ad charisma tuendum, explaining how the personal prelature of Opus Dei would be affected by the Holy Father's reform of the Curia, they also tie in the German way. This article is written, by the way, by a guy named Pedro Gabriel on Where Peter Is. It's called Opus Dei and the German Way, the meaning of filial obedience. It's interesting because, first off, we should go back and say Opus Dei was essentially pushed forward by John Paul II. Its founder, Jose Maria Escriva, was, I think, canonized on, like, if you listen to the lore, a busy day in Vatican when everyone had their attention over here. He canonized Jose Maria Escriva. We like his The Way the Furrow and the Forge, great aphoristic writing, great stuff. Steph cites him up and down in Ask Your Husband, Jose Maria Escriva, amazing, beautiful advice for wives that she cites, I think, several times throughout Ask Your Husband. By all appearances, this Spaniard is a really good man, Jose Maria Escriva. And, man, Way the Furrow and the Forge has some really, really good stuff in it. Opus Dei is all about, I don't know how to characterize it. Some of you guys think like the secular media, the Protestants, like Dan Brown, remember in the Da Vinci Code, he thought Opus Dei was like hardcore right trads in the church. Opus Dei is not actually trad at all. It's a very Novus Ordo, a religious order with the personal prelature that trad groups seek after. Now, groups like SSPX would love to have personal prelature and to basically be accountable only to themselves and the Holy Father. So, but they're very Novus Ordo, but they are generally speaking regarded as faithful and operate around the charism that you ought to be able to do holiness in the world, particularly financial influencers. So there's this financial component to Opus Dei too. I don't know if the thematic unity between the Order of Malta, the changes regarding the Vatican Bank, and Opus Dei are necessarily economic. I don't know if that's what we ought to be thinking, if there's a unifying theme to these three stories at all. Gumby on Twitter seemed to think, if I am reading between the lines correctly, that the financial emphasis, the financial undertones of these three stories are somehow tied up, and that the financial implications underscore an imminent Francis absconding from office. I don't know. I honestly don't know, but I can say typically changes to an order with personal prelature, I think, reflects more an undoing by Francis of some of the more conservative leanings of the JP2 and B16 pontificates. I don't consider John Paul II or Benedict XVI far right-wing at all, or in some ways they're not even right-wing. I mean, these are both kind of fans of the original Second Vatican Council and some of the worst ideas associated with it, like ecumenism. So I don't think these are hardcore right-wingers, are second to last and third to last popes. I don't think most of you, parish orphans and retrogrades, think so either. But Francis does have a penchant for thumbing his fingers in the eyes of the pet projects, particularly the more conservative-leaning pet projects of Benedict and John Paul II. And if that's true, to the extent that that's true, this would more be Francis thumbing his finger in the eye of JP2, because JP2 was such a Jose Maria Escriva Opus Dei fan. And Francis does like to do this. Hey, this is one of your the near and dear projects of your heart from your late pontificate, JP2, with a very long, I think second or third longest of all time pontificate. Well, I'm undoing it now. So it's kind of a middle finger. It's a definite middle finger, what he's doing to Opus Dei. Adjusting it, even if it's not directly undoing it. We'll talk about Benedict XVI in a second. Adjusting it, messing with changes that were particular and dear to JP2 well, that's offensive. But this overhaul, Opus Dei, the meaning of filial obedience, this really is quite direct. It's an insult. Personal prelature. Let's see this. The reactions from the usual suspects were swift and predictable. Fixated as they are, and this is a leftist rag, obviously. Fixated as they are in reading every church affair through the lens of their own preoccupations, says this Where Peter Is article. Influential online voices of the traditionalist movement, which are not associated with Opus Dei much, like I just said, are now claiming that this decision was meant to end the possibility of solving the rift between traditionalists and the Holy See by establishing personal prelatures similar to Opus Dei for groups like FSSP, the ICK, or even the SSPX. That's what we'd like to happen. I mean, I want for the Ecclesia Dei groups, FSSP, ICK, SP, even SSPX. I mean, if the church works stuff out with them and gave those three groups personal prelature, I would say great, right? It seems this much more likely for the former two, not the latter one. I don't think any of them are going to get it. I don't think Francis would dream of giving them, particularly following upon Traditionis Custodes the last 13, 14 months. In their exercise of papal tea leaf reading, these conservatives don't consider that this decision may actually be connected to the recent reforms of the Roman Curia promulgated through Predicate Evangelium. They don't acknowledge the possibility that this resolution may be a way for Pope Francis to help Opus Dei better use their charism in the church, and that it is more concerned with promoting an evangelizing action than with hierarchical authority. Well, I don't think so. It's Pope Francis. He's always about power. He's always about rearranging the hierarchical authority. But, and he does it in the name of promoting evangelizing action. Pope Francis thinks evangelizing is proselytizing, so why would he want to streamline it? I don't buy it. And yet, the Where Peter Is article continues, this is exactly the reasoning Francis gives in Ad Charisma Tuendum. By seeing this move as a downgrade, which it is, or a way to centralize power and control. This is the second of three stories which represent a striking at subsidiarity, and you'd say this is a move toward clericalism, not away from it. Seeing it as a downgrade, or a centralizing shift, the Pope's critics show they have the kind of worldly mindset that Francis seeks to correct. No, or it could mean that Francis has it, and that they're correctly diagnosing. There's that as well. The response of the critics contrasts remarkably with the reaction from the prelate of Opus Dei, Monsignor Fernando Ocoriz, who didn't seem too opposed to it. But I want to read you what some groups said this change to Opus Dei might mean. This is Father Zuhlsdorf. This is in late July, by the way. This is only being grouped together by outsiders of the church like Gumby. Did you know Gumby was an outsider? And took a guess. I don't agree with it much. I don't think these three stories ought to go together too much, but here's the case. Father Z, who I trust, and I think most of you trust, reasonably well, much more than Where Peter Is. Francis weakens the Opus Dei personal prelature, is the title. And Father Z says, we read today at Aquistampa that Opus Dei, which has been a personal prelature, will no longer be able to have a bishop as its prelatial head. Instead, the head of Opus Dei will be a protonotary, apostolic monsignor, the highest sort. In fairness, a PA monsignor is a prelate. The implications, Father Z says, first, I think this is good analysis. Despite the early talk about decentralizing power from Rome, clericalization and whatnot, declericalization, I should say, what we have seen again and again is concentration of more and more control in Rome. So, hypocrisy. If this reign of Francis is about anything, it is about centralizing control. While claiming he's decentralizing it, it is nutty. Right? So this did come up in arguably both of the Vatican Bank story and and the Order of Malta story. Secondly, Father Z says, the structure of the personal prelature was often thought of as a solution for traditional groups, including the SSPX. This, therefore, does not bode well for any traditional group. FSSP, ICKSP, receiving, I mean, they have an ordinary relationship. They're in full communion. And we've wanted FSSP and ICKSP to get personal prelature. But also, one more degree of separation removed, because first you have to make sure that SSPX is in full communion. There's that whole tangle. What is their status in the church now? It's less than ordinary. Well, they'd have to get back to neutral there and then be granted personal prelature. And those are, probably the best known three traditionalist groups in the church now. I know Dan Brown thinks Opus Dei is one of them, a far-right traditionalist group in the Roman Catholic Church. Opus Dei enjoys personal prelature, and it's probably because they're not a traditionalist group. I don't think a traditionalist, hi Penny, I don't think a traditionalist group would ever be granted it. Certainly not SSPX and probably not FSSP or ICK. In other news, water is still wet, Father Z jokes. Third, this could also smack of Caudillo-like revenge. More and more it seems that members of Opus Dei are not entirely thrilled with all that Francis does. Again, they were called a right-wing conservative group by Protestants think so, and Dan Brown thinks so, and leftists think anyone in the center is. But Opus Dei has never been a very right-wing group, and they were very supportive of Francis. Many of their members were very supportive of Francis, particularly in the first 5 years. Fourth, Father Z says, if there was a suggestion in the text of the council that there could be structures like Opus Dei, it seems that the spirit of Vatican II disagrees, he says. But you have to have Gnostic-like secret knowledge of the spirit of V2 to maneuver through the special accompaniment that Opus Dei is receiving. We're all walking together toward a new springtime, he says. So that's Father Z's take on this. And LifeSite, back in July, had this take on it. All this came out July the 22nd, and it's only being grouped into some sort of meaningful constellation by way of guesswork by those like Gumby on Twitter now. Pope Francis changes Opus Dei, says a bishop can no longer lead it, though it's a different kind of prelate. Uncertainty remains among commentators on the motu proprio, which we didn't cover at the time, end of July, and uncertainty remains as to whether it is intended as a punitive measure by Pope Francis. Anything Pope Francis does, almost anything Pope Francis does, I should say, that specially and especially affects any group that's right of center in the church, particularly one that's perceived as very right of center. I think it's false with regard to Opus Dei. That will usually be revenge or motivated. Okay? But Opus Dei is a financially very, very well supported group because of the way that the prelature, because of the way that the corporate structure works within Opus Dei. It is very financially, capitalistically centered. Of all of the holy order, the different orders, religious orders, it's probably the most so. So I guess you'd say financially, yes, it's very, neocon, the way that people use that term now. So it's right. That's why it's considered right-wing, but it's not spiritually right-wing. It is not traditionalist at all. It's very, very Novus Ordo. The Pontiff's motu proprio, entitled Ad Charisma Tuendum, was published by the Holy See, having been approved by Francis the week before, and is due to take effect August the 4th. So I guess it's just took effect last month. He wrote that the motu proprio is centered on his recent reforms of the Curia in Predicate Evangelium, and is intended to confirm the prelature of Opus Dei in the authentically charismatic sphere of the Church, specifying its organization in keeping with the witness of the founder, Saint Josemaria Escriva de Balaguer, and the teachings of conciliar ecclesiology about personal prelatures. So Spirit of Vatican II does not like personal prelatures, which would greatly benefit right-wingers for obvious reasons that I think you get. So you have the reform of the Curia, which touches in some implicit way on this move to have the Vatican Bank, basically all money's going through the Vatican Bank, the IOR. That's weird. I don't get it. That's complex. It's multifarious. It's iceberg theory. We don't know exactly why that is. You have the basic, more or less, the removal of personal prelature. There are other groups where you and I are probably more supportive of than Opus Dei that we are hoping would get it. I don't think anyone's going to have personal prelature moving forward. I think only 2 groups in the church ever had it. We were hoping to get more. Now one less has it. And then, of course, there is the continued shellacking of the Sovereign Order of Malta, which does have financial implications too. I don't know that this strongly evidences something I already suspect might be true. Francis is going to step down before too long. I don't think it strongly evidences enough to kind of move the yard markers and say, oh, now it's extra sure. I think these things could have an explanation as independent variables, one independent of the other. Or, I'm not trying to say tomorrow it may rain, but then again it may not. I'm just saying if there was some sort of impetus for you or I to any more than we were saying between last summer and this summer, Francis is definitely stepping down. Now, I think it remains about the same. If there was a way that we could be more certain that Francis ain't going to stick around beyond 2022, then you might look to the Gumby tweet with an eye of confirmation and say, yeah, there probably is some sort of financial grouping happening here that ties all 3 of these stories together. As it is, it's just hard to say. As it is, you'd just say whether Francis retires or not, definitely don't rule out that he'd step down. But whether he retires or not, he still likes to mess with people. He still likes to thumb his thumb in the eye of JP2. JP2 really loved Opus Dei. And Benedict. Benedict really loves the Ecclesia Dei Institutes. Benedict really loves, the groups that benefited the most from the Ecclesia Dei Commission were, of course, FSSP and ICK. And now he's basically done away with, or you saw what happened a month and a half ago in Chicago with ICK. They're basically done there. And the cause for being, raison d'etre of any of the Ecclesia Dei Institutes is to do the Latin Mass, and he's taking away their reason for being. So that's Francis thumbing in the eye of Benedict. And these guys are not super strong right-wingers, and he likes to thumb in the eye of them anyway by getting at the Ecclesia Dei groups and by getting at the far less conservative, spiritually conservative Opus Dei. So you could say, definitely this could be read as preparation for, hey, I want to tidy things up going into my 10th year. And I'd love to really screw over these center right and right wingers in the church a little bit more. My pontificate has stood for screwing them over royally. I want to get a little bit more yardage out of that revenge before I retire. But there's not really any evidence here, unless someone understands Vatican finance is just a lot better than me. There's not enough evidence to say, he's definitely going for it. He's definitely stepping down. God bless you guys. Thanks for tuning in today. Remember, first class tonight. So if you did sign up for the Baltimore Catechism free class, first class is tonight. Don't miss that, 7 Central. God bless you. Deus Vult.